everyone. Yes, yes. Am I audible, madam?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all for the second session of day 3, the Faculty Development Program on literary theory and criticism, organized by the Department of English, KTHM College, Nashik, under the UGC Stride Component 1. It's a great moment for me to introduce you to today's guest speaker. She is a professor of English and founding head of the Department of Women's Studies, University of Madras, Chennai, fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, London, UK, and former member of the syndicate nominated by the Governor Chancellor, and also she is the director in charge of UGC HRDC. So I welcome Dr. V. Bharathi Harishankar, madam. Dr. Bharati's research interest includes post-colonial studies, gender studies, literary theory, translation, web-based pedagogy, and open education resources. She has 112 publications, including books, edited volumes, textbooks, articles, and translations in national and international journals. She has presented invited talks in over hundreds conferences, most notably at Cambridge University, UK, and La Pietra Dialogues at New York University, Florence. She has successfully guided 14 M students and 14 PhD scholars. And recently, Dr. Bharati was instrumental in setting up a gender lab, the first of its kind in the country to offer online workshops on gender sensitization. She has designed a soft skill course on gender sensitization and workplace readiness. She is also the recipient of numerous prestigious national and international awards and honors. I'd like to mention few of them here. She is MHRD Leadership for Academician Program, LEAP, at Jamia Millia Islamia and University of Virginia. She is also the member of the School Board of Humanities at University of Hyderabad, then Humanities Research Center Travel Grant Australia, Shastri Indo-Canadian Collaborative Course Development Grant with Dr. Evelyn Ellerman, honorary adjunct professorship at Athabasca University, Canada. She was nominated member of Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, Australia. She's also a consultant author for Commonwealth of Learning and UNESCO. She's a member editorial board of the international journal Communication and Culture. Dr. Bharati has successfully completed conducting the following national and international projects also. There are many projects, but again, I would like to mention few of them. She was principal investigator for a project on the Devdasi system in India, funded by the National Commission for Women, and also principal investigator for a UGC UPE project on the impact of corporate social responsibility activities on the skill building of women in rural Tamil Nadu. She is also co-investigator of the Erasmus Plus project of the European Union on capacity building in higher education. So there are much to say about her, but again, because we have short of time, that's why without stretching your patience too much, I would like to request our today's guest speaker to please take the charge of today's Zoom meet and guide us on the topic feminism. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Good afternoon to all, and thanks so much, Dr. Sunita, for that very generous introduction. And also my sincere thanks to the principal and organizers of this FDP, especially Dr. Sharad Binur, who has been in touch with me. So it's an absolute pleasure meeting all of you. It's a new normal situation where the virtual meetings these days have to make do for the real meetings that we would have otherwise had. So I know the topic that was given was very, very broad-based, feminism. So I thought maybe for the purpose of the next hour or so, I would like to focus on a more specific topic. So the topic that I would like to speak about is feminist criticism, theory or thought. So already feminism for a very, very long time has either been a taboo word or it has been a fashion wagon to jump into for academics, researchers and others. So when we talk about feminist criticism, feminist theory, feminism, feminist thought, very often we look at these as interchangeable and we look at them as synonyms. So I thought it would be useful for us to converse over the next 1 hour to find out that they are not synonyms in the first place, and secondly, the kind of overlaps that exist between criticism, feminist criticism, theory and thought, as well as the idea that is very obvious but never stated very openly, the fact that feminism can actually talk to a whole lot of other literary theories. So that is why I thought it would be useful to focus my attention on a more specific topic where the topic would be feminist criticism, theory or thought. A very brief explanation about why I would put the title that way. The reason is we look at feminism as a very, very natural progression of the women's movements that happened mainly in the UK, US and Europe, and followed by several women's movements which are still happening all over the world, including the Me Too. So women's movements have contributed a great deal to what we today call feminism. Maybe at that point in time, they did not look at it as feminism, they did not look at it as any ism, because it was more a question of what do women want in their lives and how do they want to construct or how do they want to form their identities. So since that was the major focus, there were no isms that were being spoken of. But having said that, when today we look at a term like feminist criticism, we are looking at tools which would give us better insights and better tools to interpret the text in hand. I mean, we are in a postmodern discourse era where every single thing becomes a text. So that text, can feminism give a tool? Certainly, yes. So that is where we look at feminism as feminist criticism. The second aspect is the notion of feminism as a theory. Like every other theory, post-colonial, postmodern, Marxist, psychoanalysis, to name a few. When we talk about it as theory, we are looking at a framework to interpret not only literature, but also many other cultural discourses. So we have quickly moved from feminism as an outcome of the women's movements having a very, very real life praxis to moving on to feminism as criticism, which gives us a set of tools to interpret literature, and moving on to feminism as a theory, which provides us with a framework that can not only interpret but also contest the existing literary, cultural, and every other framework. And the third aspect is feminism as a thought. This aspect has been severely neglected. The reason being, we are looking at the underlying philosophy of feminism. So when we talk about the underlying philosophy, it's a very, very interesting scenario. Feminism is like a very, very eclectic mix of many other isms. So we do find a Marxist socialist concern in feminist theory. We also find a psychoanalytic string there, ecofeminism. So you name every single type of feminism, you notice that there is a philosophy that has informed that particular brand of feminism. So we move to another little jigsaw puzzle here. Why then are we talking about feminism in the singular? Not necessary. Feminism is in fact a sum total of feminisms in the plural. And that is where all of these together is what informs the feminist thought substratum that provides us both the tool and the framework as well as an underlying philosophy, and over and above all that also provides us an ideological platform, stepping board. So that is the reason why we are able to talk about race as black feminism in the sense of combining race and gender, or Dalit feminism in India in terms of combining caste and gender, Shikana feminism in terms of looking at a smaller migrant group inside the US but having very, very different experiences to share. So we have quickly gone through a fairly large spectrum, if you would notice. So am I doing this to deliberately confuse you or complicate the issue? Well, the answer is yes and no. No, because I believe that these are the basic points that we need to take into account when we talk about feminist criticism and theory. Yes, I am complicating the issue, not because, on an afternoon as a second lecture, I'm trying to make things difficult for all of us. No, certainly not. What I am trying to impress upon you is the fact that feminist criticism and theory is complex enough that we need to look at different set of handles that can provide us a more comprehensive understanding. So that is why when Rosemary Tong wrote that very, very seminal book called Feminist Thought and Introduction, initially in the 90s, but a more recent edition of the same book calls it Feminist Thought, a Comprehensive Introduction. Why? Between the first edition and the second edition, we have added a set of feminisms. You may just call them as types, or you can say each one provides a better viewing perspective of what we call feminist thought as a whole. So in order to even understand all these aspects of feminist thought, criticism, theory, we need to first ask, what is feminism? And unfortunately, the term is used a lot, but we have, our problem is the problem of plenty. We have too many definitions. So each definition of feminism is valorizing a perspective. So at a very simple level, going back to the origin, we can talk about how the biological division of the sexes between male and female may be the difference, and from the difference things started getting built up. But from there we move on to the very social construction of the masculine and the feminine, and that brings us to the notion of gender added to the biological sex. But when we keep expanding it, we arrive at a particular point which poses a lot of problems, but also allows many of us scholars and teachers here to keep thinking on the various aspects of feminism. That is the binary between self and other. So a very simple question like, why is woman the other, is actually not a simple question. It is a philosophical and, more importantly, a very existentialist question of why is woman being defined in terms of man. And of course, I mean, it is fashionable now to put all the blame on patriarchy. So if the tap in my house does not work, as a feminist, maybe I can put the blame on the man. Either the man at my own house or patriarchy at large. I mean, I know this is a very reductive, simplistic example, but I'm using it for a very specific purpose. Just as we cannot pin down on one definition of feminism, we also cannot pin down when and where and how we started differentiating the self and the other. And self almost always referring to men and other almost always referring to women. But the most interesting aspect here is, in making this binary between men and women, we have failed to take note of the varieties. I mean, all men are not the same. All women are not the same. In a certain sense, all of us include certain common aspects. However, what we fail to notice, what the socio-cultural mindset does not allow us to take note of, is the fact that the differences between men and women is not necessarily more than the differences among men and the differences among women. So if you are interested in exploring this aspect, please look up Michael Kimmel and Kimmel's classification, where he looks at the need for including men in feminism in order to expand and explore the experiences and the problems and challenges that women face, and not only women. In the contemporary context, we are also looking at the problem of heteronormativity, the heteronormative mindset that somehow still makes us fill out forms which only says male or female. And very grudgingly, we have included the other and the third sex now. But what about all the genders? LGBTQIAA++. There's a spectrum out there. So just as the feminism cannot be simplistically defined, gender cannot be reductively put into very specific categories. And this is something that problematizes this very notion of self and other. So, at a very simple level, we can say from feminist point of view, men are often considered the self, but women form the group of others. But are all men equal? When we introduce class, caste, race, heteronormativity, religion, location, we suddenly realize that the African American man does not have the same rights that Anglo-American man would have. Similarly, the upper caste man or woman for that matter in India has certain privileges that a lower caste woman does not enjoy. So our feminism cannot go in a very compartmentalized fashion, but has to necessarily take into account the eclectic and diverse trajectories in which the experiences of men, women, and other genders are faced, placed, and experienced in society, in life at large. So, when we talk about feminisms, I mean, very often we keep talking about the shades of feminism or the types of feminism. I would say, let's use a simple plural and say feminisms, because we have not come to the end of typecasting feminism. It is still growing. And it is important that we take every nuance that we can bring into feminism, because only that can allow us to arrive at a comprehensive, if not a comprehensive, moderately holistic perspective of what we mean by feminist thought, feminist theory, and feminist criticism. So, at a very, very simple level, what does feminism try to achieve? One, in the initial stages, it was questioning the female subjugation in many, many fields. Has it stopped? Not really. Even today, the number of women in STEM subjects are very, very small. And that minute number is a problem. Why? Because it is not visible. And that is where, if you happen to look at last week's Hindu, there is this scientist who has been working on a vaccine and who could not get access even to a laboratory, let alone a permanent tenured position. But what is very heartening, heartwarming is any of the vaccines that any of us have taken anywhere in the world today derives from that simple basic discovery of that particular women scientist. And till the COVID hit us, we did not think about her. And I don't think any of us questioned why she was absent. So if you are interested, please look up for Katalin Kariko. Katalin Kariko, and she is the one who has found the basic combination that allows us to feel moderately safe in these times. So, women's subjugation are sometimes overt. So when an acid attack happens, when a rape happens, it is very overt, it's visible. But it is also covert, as in the case of this particular scientist. So, This overt or covert subjugation of women has been a constant focal point of feminism, because the questioning is what unearths and makes us realize the contributions that women make. Not only that, very often, as Virginia Woolf would say, did these women exist? So, a very interesting debate there. If Shakespeare had a sister or Aristotle had a daughter, would we have known about them, let alone read their works, let alone celebrate, let alone use every theory on them? And this I'm saying it positively. I love Shakespeare because any theory for which you don't have a response, you can very easily, quickly go back to your Shakespeare and that theory will fit there. So having said that, going back to the interesting debate, a very simple query: would we have remembered, recorded, celebrated if Shakespeare had a sister or Aristotle had a daughter? Not really. At least we can't be too sure. Why so? And the reason is, feminists would say, female subjugation. So it questions female subjugation, and feminist criticism looks for tools to identify the subjugation. Feminist theory will look at frameworks that can question the subjugation or unearth the subjugation. And feminist thought would tell you why that contestation is required at all. It is required for several reasons. We cannot just ignore the silencing of women's voices. Patriarchy may be one cause, but the internalization of social norms by women themselves may be the next reason. Whatever the reason, the silencing of women's voices and a glossing over of women's experiences is unearthing them is the first purpose of feminist criticism and theory. Related to that is the fact that feminist theory also identifies and pinpoints the unequal status and treatment of women in society, in family, in literature, in very many fora. Third is to challenge those representations of women in culture and in media. I mean, it doesn't matter if we're looking at a Bollywood, Hollywood, any movie. A woman who is, I mean, you can think of very many movies when I say this. A woman who is absolutely self-confident and runs her own business or whatever is always projected as a shrew who needs to be tamed. And so we see her in actually figure-hugging and nice-looking clothes. And somewhere along by the end of the movie, she has to be in a sari. Why? And why this? Why in the 21st century? Related to this, the very, very simple representation of any reporting, newspaper reporting, media reporting of rape still asks us questions about what the woman wore and at what time of the day she was, outside when this incident happened. What feminism would tell you is we are looking for a society, we are looking for a representation that would set the aspects of society that allows this to be happening to women rather than asking what a woman wore. So if wearing revealing clothes is our one-way ticket to rape, then why are our children getting raped? Are they wearing revealing clothes? So are all the rapes happening middle of the night or late at night? It can happen anytime. There is something else in society. A society which reveres women, which adulates women, also perpetrates these crimes on women. And feminism would consciously and consistently keep identifying and questioning why this happens. And when we keep asking that, it also becomes a little catalyst for a societal transformation. Third, we may, from the argument so far, arrive at the conclusion that all of feminist theory and criticism is only to bash up men and say what is wrong with men's representation of women, or to say men are the villains in this drama of life. No. In the 1990s and later, feminism took a rather sharp turn where it talked about the need not only to question but also to present alternative and positive women's experiences of self-affirmation. Why does this become important? Very often we don't know that there are other avenues. And someone like Adrienne Rich would demystify this whole experience of motherhood to ask us whether motherhood is a biological and an experiential fact, or is motherhood an institution? And you would notice that very often the projections are all as an institution. There is a glorification. I mean, this is not to say I'm debunking motherhood, okay? I'm a happy mother as well. But all that I'm saying is it is not a choice that a woman has, but it is something that is forced upon her. So unless we read up the feminist concept of motherhood as biological experience and motherhood as institution by someone like Adrienne Rich, we may not even notice the difference between the two. We may mistake one for the other. And that is where, I brought this up because we need to realize that feminism also has a real life orientation over and above being a critical framework, theoretical framework, or a philosophical substratum. So when we look at the evolution of feminist criticism, unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a whole lot of names and books. I'm only going to pepper them a bit simply because of paucity of time. So the earliest that we can look at by going back to feminist criticism would be Mary Wollstonecraft's seminal text, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, published in 1792. It's seminal, it's pathbreaking, but sadly enough, we are still raising some of the questions that she had raised all those centuries back. So it also tells you that feminist thought and feminism in practice, already there is a little gap, and the societal mindset does not change that quickly. So that is why between 1792 and now 2021, we are debating certain very similar issues. One issue I can tell you is what we call the images of women in feminist criticism. That is, women are often represented in very, very stereotypical roles in literature. So, women as daughter, women as sister, women as wife, women as mothers. All of these representations we have had. I mean, that is why when Tessa de Duberville was called a pure woman, we were busy asking, why is she a pure woman in spite of all those life experiences? It's very similar to us raising queries about why is Draupadi a sati after marrying 5 men. So that's a little aside for you. But women have always been projected. Certain images of women are projected more and they are accepted more. And this has been questioned time and again. So that is why we even have studies where we are looking at textbooks for children and are we perpetuating the stereotypes? The answer is yes, still, in spite of all of us raising. And these images of women also leads rise to other little questions. The text that we can look at very briefly is Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Very, very often that particular text is summarized as Virginia Woolf demands that a woman should have her own room. No. I mean, if all our families gave us a room, that would still not be enough, mind you. The reason is the space. And is it a physical space? Or is it a space where a woman can exercise her voice and agency to say, I want this, I do not want this. I can do this, I do not want to do this. And are these representations there in literature, in culture? Not really. We have somehow got into the mindset where we accept those images of women. So that is where feminist theory and criticism would keep defining, questioning, and redefining the gender role expectations. We are expected to be one way. I mean, one of the things that I often ask when I go conduct a gender sensitization workshop is that, do I look like a feminist? Because, very often we have branded feminists in certain ways. I mean, if you have a long hair and a silk sari on and more or less look like a traditional woman, am I a feminist? I can assure you I am. Because where it concerns anyone transgressing that little space that I value a lot, I would question. And here is where we cannot stereotype feminist criticism as only doing certain things. The turn of the century between 20th and 21st, we have feminist theory has also started asking very many interesting questions about how women writers representing women are also stereotyping women. And they are doing something else. They are reverse stereotyping men. So, feminist criticism has been introspecting. While on the one hand, a Virginia Woolf asking for a space for women, or a Gayatri Spivak who wants the silence of the subaltern to be broken, can the subaltern woman speak? We are now looking at how by re-examining women's texts on men and women, or women's texts on other ethnicities, castes in our perception, religion, we can contest those representations as well. A very, very quick example here. When all of us read Jane Eyre as very, very young students in BA, and for me it is a good 30 years before. One of the things that all of us loved, one text we loved, was Jane Eyre. Because it is a very, very official way of reading a Mills and Boon. Mills and Boon was not allowed, you see, but Jane Eyre was part of the curriculum. We are still prescribing Jane Eyre. The point is, when the madwoman in the attic just fell off into that fire, all of us heaved a sigh of relief. We were very happy. Somewhere along the plot could be very neatly tied up. Beautiful. Till Jean Rhys came up with the White Sargasso Sea, where the mad Bertha Mason became Antoinette Cosway, who had her own identity, who gave us a perception that the mad woman, who incidentally Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar would talk about as mad woman in the attic, where women were packed off and stowed away so that we don't have to look at them. That question is made possible because Jean Rhys took a perspective which was different from Charlotte Bronte. And now, I'm waiting for the text that would contest Jean Rhys. If you read White Sargasso Sea, how are the Creoles of the Caribbean presented there? And that is where a little silence that, see, there was a little silence about the mad woman in the attic, which Jean Rhys took up, but she in her turn has placed a little silence in terms of the character Tia and Christophine in White Sargasso Sea. That absence or that silence can provide us with another representation, I would here call it a representation, of the same scenario, the same story from a very, very new perspective. And feminism is trying to do this not only in the text by men, but also in the text by women. And when that happens, we start looking at women as the subject of representation and not an object. So what do I mean by this subject versus object? Very often, representation of women and other marginalized groups in literature, in culture, has been through stereotypes, but those stereotypes have made women the objects. So they are the object of representation and not really the subject. And when we do not see representations where we have women and other marginalized groups as subjects of representation, how can we talk about whether the self of women or the identity of women have been represented properly? And this brings us to the entire politics of representation. One of the books that you may want to read is especially the introductory chapter of Mary Daly's book, Beyond God the Father. When Mary Daly introduces a book, she gives a very, very simple scenario. If instead of Adam, Eve had woken up first, would she have named the world the way it has been named and the way we are all following it today? Still, the answer is no. That brings us to the politics of not only literature, but even the politics of language. Are women as writers? Are women as users of a language? Communicators in a language? Using a language that is not necessarily their making? Certainly. Here is where there has been a demand time and again for the need for, say, what Helen Sixu would call the écriture féminine. That is, female writing. So when women have a language to write in, will they express it better? We would notice here that not only the language we use, the literary forms we write in, the literary forms we study and analyze, have all been just inherited. I mean, that is one reason why you would notice that a whole lot of life narratives are coming from women. It's a wonderful experience. Emma Roche, a native Canadian writer, would say, every time a woman writes a life narrative, she's actually quilting. I mean, it's a brilliant metaphor. Why? Quilting is a community-based exercise. Quilting, when you make a quilt, you do not look at color-coordinated, matched, single-textured, single-colored fabric. The identity for women. And when these representations can provide women with the identity, that is when all the challenges and problems that feminists have been raising all these years, feminist critics, they can be answered to a certain extent. But I must also tell you that Sixu's écriture feminine need not be a total collapse of language, existing languages, but adaptation, adoptation, and contestation of the language. A very quick example here. When Kerry Hume, the New Zealand writer, who then went on to win the Commonwealth Prize, submitted a manuscript of the novel The Bone People, she was rejected by half a dozen publishers. And when finally a publisher picked it up, the editor kept marking off passages saying, no, these words don't exist. They're not in the dictionary. And later, much later after she won the prize, Kerry Hume stated in an interview, she gave one example. The word meld, M-E-L-D. So she was asked to change. So apparently the copy editor, a very honest human being like many of us here, said, no, the word can be either melt or mold. But Kerry Hume's point was, do they have to be two separate activities? Can they melt, and as they melt, can they mold? And that is when she used the word meld. And this kind of creative reinterpretation of language is one tool that feminist theory and criticism allows us to explore. So, having said this, is feminism, we already know it is not a monolithic structure, it's very, very eclectic. Problem happens because we mistake this eclectic nature for a kind of ambiguity that is inherent. And the point that I'm trying to raise here is feminist theory draws a lot from Marxism, psychoanalysis, postcolonialism, and postmodernism. So you see a whole lot of projections. So even a Kristeva or a Sixu, you can see the impact or the influence of Lacan or Foucault or Derrida. Similarly, when you look at your Anglo-American feminists, there is a lot of the influence of not only psychoanalysis but Marxism, socialism, certainly the liberal movements. But what is very often overlooked is the fact that, yes, feminism has its... sorry, is it time? Can I continue?
Yes, madam, please continue.
Sure. So, what happens is feminism derives certain ideas. So, for instance, Marxism
Sorry for the interruption, ma'am. I have muted the participant. You can continue. Bharti, ma'am, please continue.
Yeah, thank you. So, what happens when feminist theory aggregates from other theories? Say Marxism is that it not only takes a basic concept from Marxism, but also improvises, improves upon it, also contests the existing framework. To give a quick example, certainly the notion of a classless society and capitalism as creating the hierarchy, social hierarchy, is a very, very welcome concept in feminist theory. However, what feminists would add to it is how within the class hierarchy there is a gender hierarchy, and therefore it leads to multiple levels of marginalization and oppression. So here is where it is adopting a concept but improving and extending the scope of, say, the Marxist theory. Feminism does that with other theories as well. For instance, if you look at post-colonial feminism or third world feminism or black feminism, one of the things they are asking is, are the experiences of women across societies and cultures the same? The answer is a very definite no. And that is where race or caste or cultural differences gets woven into the feminist framework. So within the feminist framework, the women of color feminism, or as Alice Walker would call it, womanism, is saying that even within feminism, there are other aspects that we need to consider. I mean, here is where another very interesting concept has come up in feminist theory. The concept is Kimberly Crenshaw's idea of intersectionality. So, what Crenshaw posited in the race to gender context in the US actually holds good for many of our contexts, whether it is Native Canadians to mainstream Canadians, Aborigines in Australia, or the African Americans in the US, or the many, many caste groups in India. All of us are asking one simple question here. The question is, when the gender question gets marked by other factors, other social factors such as class, caste, religion, or anything else, is the oppression more or less? And the point is, the oppression multiplies. And therefore, within the rubric of post-colonial feminism or black feminism, we are looking at the very specific aspect of feminism that would satisfy that particular scenario. Similarly, psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis has been used extensively in feminism. So much so we have a branch of feminism called Psychoanalytic Feminism, just as we have post-colonial feminism. But under Psychoanalytic Feminism, it is looking at not only the psychological aspects in a text, but also looking at and contesting Freud's notion. I mean, Freud gave the initial impetus to psychological feminism, but there is a contestation of Freud. it is like completely solving the world's problems through the Oedipal conflicts. Not necessarily. There are other factors. To the extent that Freud allowed or opened out, maybe a Pandora's box, but opened out a taboo on discussing sexuality and death, certainly he had done a great service. However, the psychoanalytical framework that Freud gave us is not really pro-women. And that is where psychoanalytic feminists would look for revising that model so that we take this aspect of talking about sexuality more openly, whereas the assumptions that Freud made in psychoanalysis, many of them happen to be reductive, need to be studied and examined more closely. So that is where feminism has not only been taking the concepts, but they have also been modifying and giving it back to the same set of disciplines. But it has also done something else. What we notice is feminism is adding gender to many fields. So ecofeminism, to give you a very quick example, where the subjugation of women and degradation of nature has happened simultaneously and parallelly thanks to the patriarchal setup. So whether it is Vandana Shiva talking about how they, by paying close attention to the gender question in the ecological studies, we can actually move towards a more sustainable framework for development. So feminist theory is a very broad area. It touches upon many things. However, we already have a lot of backlashes on feminist theories. This has to be viewed in two ways. Some of these are very valid criticisms. So, for instance, the feminazis are feminists, radical feminists who set about changing the entire lexicon. So a simple example is they did not want to use the word woman, W-O-M-A-N or M-E-N, because it includes man in it or men in it. So they said, no, we want to spell it as W-O-M-Y-N, women. That is taking it to a very extreme standpoint. So that is why they wouldn't want it to be called history, but called it her story. So the reason why I mentioned her story is, it's very interesting because if you take it as a feminazist perspective, it's not necessary. However, to the extent that every history needs a revision from a woman's point of view or a marginalized group's point of view, that revision is made possible when we say her story. So, feminism has been looking at text discourses from the language point of view, from the theoretical, disciplinary point of view, but what it also allows us is to look at the heteronormative constructions. This is the latest that we are doing, where gender or sex cannot be looked upon as a binary. but needs to be looked upon as a spectrum. And if that is the case, how is the third gender presented in the media, presented in text, and what do we do to alter and stabilize that particular perception? Well, that no doubt will move into the queer studies area, which again is a fascinating area to work on. But having said this, what are we looking at when we say feminism? We are looking at diversity, we are looking at plurality, we are looking at multiple points of view, we are looking at the fact that no one point of view or perspective is more valorized than the other. But over and above all that, what it is doing is what Elaine Showalter would say: stop trying to fit women between the lines of the male tradition, but focus instead on the newly visible world of female culture. So that is why we have had three very distinct phases in feminist criticism, starting with the feminine, where to a very large extent women characters, women writers and women scholars were busy looking at how the representations happened. So we seem to agree with the expectations. But we move to the feminist phase where there was a contestation. Why should it be so? Can't we have it any other way? And the third stage is what she would call the female stage, where we are looking at, we are introspecting on where women's representation by men, by women, and representation of men by women, what needs to change, and how do we negotiate the politics. Of course, Showalter would advocate for gynotexts or gynocritics who would be women-focused. But I would say we need to expand the net larger now, because just through a women-focused, women-centric perspective, we will not be able to rectify the imbalance. What we need as a tool in feminist criticism, or as a framework in feminist theory, or as a philosophy in feminist thought, is to look for sex and gender not as a binary, but as a very, very broad canvas, each of which has a lot of stories to tell us, a lot of perspectives to provide. If we are willing to consider those perspectives, yes, feminist thought can open out an entire new panorama for you. But if we still resist, or as feminists, if we restrict ourselves to focusing on only certain aspects, then feminism will not and cannot do a proper service. But having said that, I would also say it is a disservice we do to feminism if we limit feminism. But at the same time, if we open out feminism, then certainly the arena is wide open, and more perspectives would emerge, and those perspectives can in fact allow us to start erasing this binary of self and other. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. I would be happy to take questions, comments, If any of you want to completely disagree with me, I would be happy to hear that too. Thank you.
Participants, you can ask questions. I am unmuting you all. See, if anyone has any question, you are free to ask your question, provided you keep your questions short and decent. Do ask sensible questions. Participants, you have been unmuted.
Okay, there is one thing in the chat box. While matrilineal societies exist, matriarchy is not practiced. Can it be seen in the future? So the question, see, the point is, can I? The problem is not so much whether matriarchal societies would give us the much needed agency and voice, because what we know is patriarchs are not all men. There are women who are patriarchs. So it is the system and body of thought that we are contesting, but so not so much. See, the matrilineal to matriarchy, if it provides a good alternative to patriarchy, if it avoids the problems, the excesses that we find in patriarchy, yes, it would be very welcome. But I must also sound a word of caution. Women are also patriarchs, so you can also have men as matriarchs in the future. So matriarchy by itself cannot give us a solution. It is the question of finding a balance between men and women. And that is where we need to take that call very, very closely. There's another question from Vandita. Would you agree that stereotype is anything that is conventional and in private? Okay. Okay, that is a whole set of questions, but Nandita, let me tell you one thing. One answer that will probably cover all your questions. Point is, stereotype by itself is you can just look at it simply as a way of communication, a way of articulation. There's no problem with that. However, what we notice is stereotyping of the marginalized groups is not the way they want to be represented. It is always forced on them. Okay? So it is when that choice is taken out. There was this meeting in the 1980s, and apparently one thing that one gentleman by mistake entered into a hall where women, quote unquote, feminists were discussing. So apparently he quickly stepped out and said, no, let me get out of here. So the point is, that is stereotyping as well. Feminism needs to include men. And if I'm putting forward ideas, I want men in my life to know that, so that, there will be enough change. But the problem with stereotype is, stereotyping is done in a very, very straight-jacketed fashion, and the marginalized groups are stereotyped more often than the dominant groups. That is where we get into a problem. And once that is contested, there is a good reason we can actually try and avoid all the other politics of representations. Okay. Yeah, do you think the use of the term third gender is problematic? Yes, but for want of a better term now, because we have actually moved around with so many terms, other genders, other sexualities, all of these are bringing us to the same problem. So, first of all, apologies, I used it as third gender, but what I would normally use is the entire format LGBTQIA++. Let us have the entire spectrum. Let us not cherry pick one or the other. So, thanks for pointing that out. Women beware women is a tagline. Yes. See, this women beware women has to be taken with not a pinch of salt, but an entire bag full of salt. It is women beware women because it is within a patriarchal framework, ultimately. So, even behind a woman who turns against another woman, there is a patriarchal setup at work. So, I would actually not use it because I feel we need to be aware and alert to many other factors. So, even when a woman is pitted against a woman, it is still patriarchy at work. So, I would like to actually contest go to the root cause and weed it out instead of just plucking the weeds at the top. So, women beware women is, as you rightly pointed out, used against us very, very frequently and very successfully also. Because I've used women I've seen feminists using that as well. Okay. Womanism, do you want to know a little bit more on it? If that is the case, I would just redirect you to Alice Walker's essay on the same name, Womanism. Okay. Basically, to say that when we say feminist, it does not necessarily include women of color, African American women, or women in the third world countries at all. So, she wanted a more inclusive term, womanism, because feminism, all said and done, started at the more mainstream launch is what feminism had. Womanism is contesting that mainstream launch. Maybe you were looking for an essay answer. I gave you a short question because I saw a few other queries as well. A phallocentric world reiterates the phallocentric linguistics, imposing a subordinate role to women. How can it be done away with? Thanks, Rohit. Because, I'm happy it comes from a man. The reason is, I don't think we need to do away with something. Okay? In fact, that has been the problem with any of the more radical movements, including the feminist movement, time and again. But by contesting and modifying it, we can work within the framework, but make that framework suitable for our use. So, we cannot go back and start changing languages which are oriented that way for now centuries or as far as back as humankind. Given that, it may be useful to take them, contest, identify problems, modify it to suit ourselves. I think that would be a better approach. Nowadays, the concept of stereotyped women is changing. As far as urban and working women are considered, the modern women are drastically changing. Isn't it true? Sangeeta, I wish it is true, but it is not, unfortunately. Reason is, you'll all recognize the ad if I mention to it. Most of the ads now are seemingly very, very progressive. Okay? So this woman is a boss and her husband is reporting to her. So end of the day, she talks tough to him, and we find him working hard to meet the deadline, but she quickly comes home and cooks the dinner. So as a wife, she wants to make up for what she did as a boss. I mean, on the surface, we will all look at it as very progressive. But to my mind, it's the most regressive act. I mean, why could they have, as a boss, I would actually get my team to work together with me. We'll all finish it, then go back, and then we'll have our dinner together. So you would notice that the most progressive acts also are automatically creating stereotypes. So if you want to read up a little more on this, look at Mary Ellman's concept of stereotypes. Mary Ellman would say how it's like a balloon. A stereotype is like a balloon. We keep blowing into it. At one point, it will just burst. Right? So that way, it bursts. But what happens is we'll pick up another and start blowing into the other one from a different point of view. So in other words, stereotypes never go away. They keep different forms, and that is where it becomes very difficult to contest stereotypes. Contemporary understanding of feminism moves from standing for the rights of women and often kept to feminazi or even pseudo-feminism. Does this allow us to look into the way feminist criticism works and that it should be changed, mended in some way? Sharu, the very fact that you have raised it already shows that you're thinking about the problems. And let me tell you, no theory is perfect. No criticism is complete. I mean, that is why we have had so many theories flooding us. And that is why all of you are reading so many of those books and articles by Pramod Nair. The reason is the theories keep coming to address a specific need. So instead of looking at feminist criticism in a very traditional, historical, time-bound manner, I would say it would be more useful to look at how it has shifted and what contours it is taking as we move along. And if we take that aspect, we should be able to look at all of these aspects as certain phases in the progression or evolution of a particular theory. I mean, I think a theory is only as good as the number of changes it can take. That's a very personal opinion. But the more changes a theory can take, I think the more robust it would become. And so if I were you, I wouldn't look at it in a compartment, but I would say all of these exist even now and they're existing parallel. So that is where our service as scholars would be to delineate and say, why are we still doing this? Let us move on from this. Right? So I think that would be a very good task for you to take up. Do you see feminist agenda changing with gender performativity? Yes, Sachin, thanks for that question. I mean, even as I was answering those questions, I said, oh my God, time is up. I did not even mention Judith Butler. The quick answer to that is yes, feminism no longer can have a pointed agenda, but has to necessarily take into account that gender is constructed, gender constructions change, and everything depends on what I am fond of calling being and doing gender. I mean, you're a man, I'm a woman, but the roles we take on may necessitate us to perform our gender very, very differently. I mean, as an administrator, for instance, I cannot be very quiet. I need to be assertive, even if it is seen as an aggression. So that is where performing of gender, in fact, can be a whole new session. But this performativity, in my opinion, does something very nice for all of us. It questions the fact that we stagnate and we fix ourselves within an expectation, either a gender role expectation or a stereotype. So that is why when we perform gender, I think there will be more fluidity in the entire gender spectrum. So when that happens, some of the earlier questions that have been raised would also be answered automatically. So either the stereotyping or the different stages of feminism or a very historically bound feminism, all of these can be changed. So thanks for raising that query.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I think we have gone through the whole list. Yeah.
Is Bharati Raje Bhosle madam
Yes.
there? Bharati
Yes,
Raje
sir.
Bhosle.
Yes, sir.
Madam, please proceed with vote of thanks.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. It gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks. At first, I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Bharathi Harishankar madam, for sharing her views on feminist criticism, theory, and thought. Her insightful lecture will be fruitful for all of us. Thanks a lot, madam. Then I would like to thank our principal, Dr. V.B. Gaikwad sir, for his encouragement and support. Thank you, Dr. Sharad Binno sir, Dr. Yogesh Ganguly sir, Dr. Tushar Patil sir, the coordinator of FDP, my colleagues, and thank you very much, dear participants. Thank you all.
Thank you, Raje Bhosle ma'am.
Thank you, Bharti, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks
Sure.
so much.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Sharad here. Sharad. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Hey, madam. कोणी म्यूट केलं?
yeah. So very happy that I could share my thoughts with all of you, and thanks so much for the invitation, Dr. Sharad.
Thank you, ma'am.